What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. Today, we're going to give out a little bit of love, some underappreciated players in the NBA, or more specifically, some underrated players in the NBA. But we're going to do it in AVC style, meaning we're going to go through a lot of analytics and get you guys familiar with some of these names that you're probably not paying a lot of attention to. Let's jump into it. And this brings us to dunks and threes. So this is a website that you guys probably see me pull up every once in a while in reference to talking to specific players. And that's because Dunks and Threes is one of the few websites that deals with EPM, which is estimated plus minus. In my opinion, as a guy that runs a basketball analytics company, I think EPM is one of the best statistics to look at in terms of determining how good an individual player is at certain things, whether that be offense or defense or just overall as a player. If you guys want to know like what EPM is, they give you a very in-depth look as to how they calculate this stuff, because normal plus minus is kind of a nothing stat in some ways. It's kind of interesting in certain senses. Like, I'm not saying you can't derive anything from it, but overall, it's a flawed stat. Stats like this are pretty well thought through. Now, I'm a stats guy, right? I'm a stats guy. I run a stats company, but you'll even hear me say when I'm talking to teams like, hey, stats does not capture everything, right? Like if I go and I look at, okay, who are the best defensive players in the NBA? Victor Wembanyama should be number one, right? Look how high Alex Caruso is on the list. There's plenty of reasons why Victor Wembanyama isn't higher, and that's just because a lot of people understand that Victor Wembanyama is so impactful defensively that teams just try not to attack him. They game plan around him for certain aspects, and so a lot of that isn't seen or taken into account of things. So we have to use a little bit of reasoning and logic, like with any analytics, right? That's just good consulting. That's just good, I guess, critical thinking skills, right? So there's things that are missed, but generally these stats are pretty accurate, right? If you were to look at the top couple players in the NBA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, Wembanyama, Donovan Mitchell, Luka, Giannis, Steph Curry, yep, that all seems to track for the most part. And if you're curious, we've got kind of like a little graph over here that says like, look how high Shai and Jokic are compared to like the next closest person and Wembanyama. These two are just on another level right now, which is absolutely crazy. But what are we doing today? Today, I want to use EPM to say, hey, who are some of the more underrated, like, impactful players in the NBA that we're not giving enough attention to? You'll see underneath here, I can zoom in a little bit so that you guys can see. We've got a number right here, so this is like their EPM, right? And it's just adding together this offensive number and this defensive number right here, right? So that's how you get your EPM. The number under here is the percentile, right? If you're the 100th percentile, that means you are the best at it. If you are a 0 percentile, you are the worst at it. Like Giannis right here is only taking threes about 20% of the time, right? So he's the first percentile, right? It just doesn't happen very much for him. Or like free throw percentage itself, like he's the third percentile for that. That's not very good, thus the red coloring. Pretty simple, right? So what I want to do is I'll probably go down to like the 85th percentile, and I haven't taken time to look at this like beforehand. I want to just click on the people that are maybe a little bit surprising on this list. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on them, talk about them, and just try to give them some appreciation. And honestly, the first name that comes up here for me is Jaren Jackson Jr. And like, I think we all understand that Jaren Jackson Jr. is a very good basketball player. I know I talked about in the video yesterday that you guys saw. I said before the season, I'm like, I would rather have Jaren Jackson Jr. on a team than Ja Morant. And I was hit with a lot of ridicule by people that kind of only watch things on Instagram and they see Ja Morant dunk on people. And Ja Morant's awesome, right? Ja Morant is 100% going to show up on this list at some point. I'm not sure we need to talk about him because I don't think he's underrated by any means. But taking a look at Jaren Jackson Jr., I think it's important to note how good of a basketball player that he is. So right now, he's clocking in at the 94th percentile on offense and the 95th percentile on defense, bringing him in at the 98th percentile overall. Looking at last year wasn't as good for him, right? He was playing with a lot of injured players. We can make a lot of sense out of that. The couple seasons before, man, 96th percentile, 91st, another 63. I'm not really sure what was happening that season. Oh, he only played 11 games that season. That's kind of what was going on there. But always consistently kind of the top 75% of the league since he's gotten in, on a large part because of the defensive side of things. These couple seasons were when we started to see a little bit more foul trouble and stuff like that, but Jaren just feels like he's kind of on another level right now. He's shooting 36% from 3 right here. That's not a percentage, right? That's the, is this, I have to remember, is this shot location as a breakdown? No, this is percentage right here. So he is shooting about 36% from 3, which is above league average, and we absolutely take that. I want to take a look at some of his other shooting stats right here and some of his points per 75. And one of the things I was curious to see are like his percent assisted. The percent assisted just means like what percent of your shots are you getting set up by someone else. Basically, you're getting an assist in it. And what I'm curious about is like it's only 22% right now. That number's been very steadily decreasing, and I'm actually surprised that it's lower than last season. Because if you guys remember last season, Jaren Jackson Jr. was just kind of going at it, right? He was just like, screw it. Like all the other dudes on my team are kind of bums right now. I'm just going to go for it myself. It's actually even lower than it was the season before, which is pretty interesting overall. And here we can see like an actual like little heat map of where Jaren's doing his work. A lot of it here in kind of the mid-range and in the paint. In the corners, I presume those are where he's getting a lot of assists from, right? If we go take a look up here, yep, we're getting at least half of our 3-point attempts as assisted passes, which I think is kind of interesting here. I'm gonna guess the ones up here, more towards like the wings, are probably less assisted. Would be my guess, but I find that really interesting. But I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is just really underrated in how effective he is and how much he does for the Memphis Grizzlies. So I don't know. I thought that was a good name to start off with. So let's go and break down some more. Let's go to actual. I don't want to look at expected. That's a whole different conversation to have here. Who do we want to talk about next? Evan Mobley's pretty high on this list. I feel like that's expected. Franz Wagner, pretty high on the list. We could take a quick look at Franz. I think that's interesting. You guys have heard me say a bit recently on the channel, like, we don't need to go into the whole Orlando Magic and their front office. I just don't think have done a very good job this season. But you've probably heard me say recently, like, I think that people need to pay more attention to Franz than Paolo at this point because of what Franz is doing on the court. Franz this season, 94th percentile offensively, despite being a pretty poor three-point shooter throughout his career, right? Like 20th percentile, 9th percentile last year. The free throw percentage helps a lot. That's nice. He's in the 88th percentile assist-wise. That's going to play a big part in it. He's not turning the ball over very much. Very cool. And then defensively, 89th percentile. I think you look at a lot of the Orlando Magic guys and presume defense first, but Franz just making a lot of smart decisions. He may not be the deadliest of shot creators, right? Because again, we see the percentages aren't anything like all that crazy. He's not getting himself like a ton of really difficult shots, but overall, I don't know. I think Franz is a pretty impactful player. We can take a look at some of these percent assisted numbers right here, and the Magic just don't have much of an offense, so I would assume that these numbers are pretty low across all of the guys that you look at, and that makes a lot of sense. He's mostly going at the rim right now. We see him driving and trying to get to the rim pretty often right now. That's not surprising. Probably don't want to see this mid-range quite as high, but again, that's what happens when you don't have a great offensive team, is these mid-range kind of settling shots tend to go up a little bit. Like, yeah, this little scattered heat map that we're seeing right here, not ideal overall, but again, that's more of a team thing, I think, more than anything. So a little bit of a shout out to Franz Wagner there. I think that's an important one to point out. Okay, Ty Jerome is definitely one we have to look at here, because here's the thing. Let's use a little bit of critical common sense, right? This chart right here would tell us that Ty Jerome is what? He's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. He's the 15th best player in the NBA. Statistically, yes, that is correct. But do we know Ty Jerome's not quite on that level? Yes, we understand that. But here's what Ty Jerome has going for him. He plays not a ton of basketball minutes, right? And he puts up a large amount of production when he's in. And that's because, look, he's never going to have a great person guarding him because there's a ton of other people that needs to be guarded in a game. But Ty Jerome is making the most of his situation right here. And statistically, pretty underrated and underappreciated basketball player. Again, if he didn't have two elite people at his position, Mr. Darius Garland and then Donovan Mitchell, things would probably be a little bit different. But 95th percentile overall offensively is pretty nuts. Still in the top 75 percentile defensively. We've got a pretty dang good basketball player. Mid-range percentage is off the charts right now. 3-point percentage, he's shooting almost 45% from 3. That's pretty crazy. That's obviously going to help him quite a bit here. Assist percentage is really high, and again, that helps because you have a lot of good basketball players on your team. That's just going to impact it a little bit more. There's an ambulance going by. I got to stop my recording. You look at some of the other efficiency numbers too, like the true shooting percentage. We're not surprised it's so high because he's such a good 3-point shooter. He's taking it in pretty high volume. That's obviously going to help that in the effective field goal percentage. Those are both in the 90th percentile. Again, very efficient from everywhere. At the rim, not very good. Not the best, especially if we probably looked per position. I bet you it'd be even worse because that's just not necessarily a strength of his. And he's creating all of his shots himself. That's just kind of how it is. I'm kind of curious, like, how do you even get, like, assisted mid-range shots nowadays? I guess that's like you catch, you drive, and then you take the... Yeah, no, never mind. That's exactly what's going on. Taking a look at his heat map here. Nothing crazy overall in terms of like shot density. Most of it is coming at the rim, which I find it interesting, and he's not as effective there. So that's kind of saying like he's maybe not even playing like to his best game right now. So something to watch for with Ty Jerome. I don't know. I find that kind of interesting. By the way, I'm really trying a new thing with this video here. I went and actually, I have an account like this for my own usage, for my own company, that I don't want to put all of my company's stuff on there. It's got logos and everything like that incorporated with it. That you guys just don't need to see, but I wanted to get a little bit more into the analytics with you guys this week, and just I find it kind of interesting to talk about some of these players. Domantas Sabonis down here, we're not going to click into him. You guys have heard me talk enough about him on the channel. I think he should be a lot more appreciated than where he is, 96th percentile overall. There's J-Dub here to 96th percentile, Derek White, Cade Cunningham, Alex Caruso. He's the 100th percentile defensively. He's actually below average offensively, which makes a lot of sense. But because he's so impactful defensively, he's going to end up on this list. We can click into Alex Caruso quickly because why not? Right? Again, the offense, not that great right now. He's not having a great shooting season. The mid-range doesn't even really fall onto the scale. He's not shooting very well at the rim right now. The true shooting percentage and the effective field goal are going to be down just because of the 3-point consistency here. Turnover percentage, pretty good. We like that. The assist percentage is pretty good. The steal percentage, incredibly high. You look at his numbers throughout his career. Really impressive. Since he came into the NBA, 86th percentile defensively or higher. It looks like hasn't dipped too far since then, which is pretty cool. Obviously, 100th percentile, 99th, 97th. Like, this guy's just like crushing it defensively. So that's no surprise there whatsoever. If we go and take a look at some of the finer shooting numbers right here, now I'm taking these in at the same time you guys are. A lot of his stuff is assisted, 100% assisted from the mid-range. I can't imagine he's taking a lot of those, but still. Yeah, very high percentages across the board here. He's not doing a lot of shot creation himself. And overall, most of his stuff coming at the rim. This is what you want to see, though, from a shot density like heat map right here. And that's what the Thunder do so well. They play a very effective, very consistent style of basketball. And he's just getting a lot of cuts to the back door where he's going and making smart plays. People are passing him the ball right here. We see the Shays and the Cason Wallaces, J-Dub, even Hartenstein and Chet, I'm sure. And he's able to make things happen. So shout out Alex Caruso. Where do we want to go next for people? Where do we want to go next? We have Halliburton, Kyrie Irving, Damian Lillard, Anthony Edwards, Jimmy Butler. Not a surprise there, but what you might be surprised about with Jimmy Butler, I talked about this earlier in the season, 96th percentile offensively, 55th percentile, so just barely above league average defensively. Kind of interesting. Not exactly what you expect of Jimmy Butler, but he's been so effective in the shots that he's taking and all the assists that he's getting. He's just playing a very analytically sound offensive game right now, so it's no surprise to see him there. And then I think you're going to start to see this defensive number probably go up. He's also just getting a little bit older now. He feels like one of those guys that's going to turn it on a little bit more in the playoffs. But Asar Thompson here. That's probably one that we should pull up, right? Everybody loves the Thompson twins. Not a surprise to see him so high on the list. 99th percentile defensively, 55th percentile offensively, so just a bit above league average here. Brings him up to the 94th percentile overall. Taking a look at the effective field goal percentage, that's really good. That's probably because he's making such a high percentage of them at the rim. Yeah, 82nd percentile there. Not exactly shooting the ball very well, right? Not from the free throw line, the 3-point, or anything like that. The offensive rebound percentage for someone 6'7", typically playing a guard role, but more of a forward as of late, 81st percentile there. pretty crazy. The steal percentage, obviously very, very high. Keeping the turnovers pretty low. We like that. Assist percentage, actually kind of surprisingly high in the 61st percentile. Again, if you look at it last season, 43rd, it just helps that you have more shooters on the team, right? So I think that's the logic that you take away from it there. If you compare, I should look at his numbers from last season. So the offensive numbers have gone up quite a bit. Again, more spacing. Cade Cunningham being on the floor a little bit more makes a lot of sense. But even last year, his defensive numbers, we all remember being pretty crazy. Taking a look, the percent assisted, I would expect to be a little bit higher, actually. But I guess you think about it, there's not a ton of people playmaking on this team not named Cade Cunningham, right? So that actually does make a lot of sense. You take a look at, like, the rim percentage stuff, that's a little bit different. He catches a lot of alley-oops. That's where I imagine that kind of comes from. And then the three-point percentage, we're just not even going to worry about that because it's not a huge scale. He's rim running a lot. That's totally expected, right? I think we all watch the highlights. He's one of those guys that always knows when to backdoor, both him and his brother, right? Always knowing when to backdoor. As soon as they see a defender's head, they're going. As soon as someone gets to the middle of the court, they're cutting. They're looking for something. Even on the wings, when guys like rip baseline and stuff, I see Asar and Amen Thompson like cutting the perfect way to go get something, and they're using that athleticism to go up and dunk the ball, right? It's no surprise. You're even seeing a red line right on the rim right there. Like, yeah, no, they're dunking that basketball. So no surprise. No surprise there with Asar Thompson. Who is next on the list that we want to take a look at? So we have Karl Anthony Towns here defensively. Pretty rough. Offensively, really, really good. But when you're that good offensively, it tends to skew things. It's the same with Alex Caruso, right? We have Jared Allen, Kevin Durant still up here. Peyton Pritchard, 95th percentile offensively and above league average defensively, right at the 0 mark, actually. Kind of cool. Norman Powell, Jalen Brunson, Alperen Şengün, who surprisingly better defensively than offensively. I feel like people look at him more as like maybe it's because of the baby Jokic thing that you would expect to see him a little bit higher offensively than defensively, but he's a very sound defensive guy. Just I think it's because of his size, and he tends to stay down and not do anything like too crazy that way. Because if we go and look at like his actual block percentage, for a big man, it's not anything that crazy. So I think he's just a really sound like team defender. Derek Lively here, that's not a surprise. What I am curious about, like, yeah, look at the assist percentage for Derek Lively, 61st percentile. I'd actually like to compare that to last year because I think that was one of the biggest jumps in his game. Yeah, look at this, 19th percentile last year, right? We kind of talked about how most of his game was run, jump, and dunk. But if you've been watching the channel this year, I said one of the biggest things with Derek Lively was that now when, like, at the time, Luka, I know, we mentioned it in every video, and now Kyrie, who just went down with an injury, things just keep getting worse. But when they would get iced, because that is the only way to deal with those two, it just is, you have to hit somebody for the pocket pass, and now you're playing 4-on-3 basketball, and you need someone to kind of make that decision and be that next playmaker. I was saying PJ Washington should be that. Derek Lively kind of surprisingly became that player, and I think that that's really cool. And obviously, if we take a look at his shooting numbers, it's solely at the rim, right? But overall, I don't know. I just found that kind of interesting to see that growth in Derek Lively. Where are we at right now? We're only at the 92nd percentile. Like I said, I think I'm going to go down to 85th. Kristaps Porzingis having a really good offensive season. Devin Booker, 97th percentile here, kind of having a rough defensive year. Again, we've seen Booker have good defensive seasons, but this Suns team is just... It's just a mess. LaMelo Ball, like all Charlotte Hornets players, you tend to see this offensive number pretty high, 97th percentile here, despite not being very efficient. Like, that just shows how much he's contributing on that end. And then 13th percentile defensively. Pretty bad. Actually, look at how low Jalen Brunson is on the defensive end of the court. And look, that's probably just because he is small, and you guys hear me talk about this on the channel a lot. You can be as solid as you want defensively and skill set wise. Size does matter. Sorry fellas, size does matter. It just does, right? Bigger guys attack you. Mass and strength just matter at the end of the day. So something to consider. Desmond Bane up here, even more of an impactful offensive player than I think people realize. Austin Reeves having an awesome offensive season. Joel Embiid, despite everything, still one of the better players in basketball. Dorian Finney-Smith. Here we go. 71st percentile offensively. Pretty solid, actually. Probably higher than you would have thought. And 98th percentile defensively. Let's take a look at Dodo really quick. And let's just let's take a look at his career, right? Was a much higher offensive rated player from like 2020 to 2022. Those are the Luka days, right? A lot of people setting him up. And if we looked at his 3-point percentage, actually nothing bad by any means, just pretty solid 3-point shooting overall. Obviously, we're up to the 40% now, which is in the 87th percentile. I think it's interesting that he kind of fell off a little bit in the Brooklyn days because, again, you don't have as good of teammates. Things start to fall off a little bit, right? As soon as you get back around better teammates. This is why you hear me saying on the channel sometimes you have to think like past the basic numbers, right? You could look at a guy, and I guess we could use Dorian Finney-Smith as an example, right? Last season, somebody might have said, oh, Dorian Finney-Smith, he's shooting below league average from 3. Like, he might have lost a step or whatever. But we can use some common sense to say, hey, he's also not on a very good basketball team right now. Like, things are kind of all over the place. It doesn't make a ton of sense to expect him to maybe have the same level of production. You get him on a team with better basketball players, things start to go a little bit better, right? Things just start to go a little bit better. So that's just kind of the talking point there, I guess, if nothing else. But the 98th percentile defensively, it looks like it's never dropped below 65, and it's never dropped below 75 since his rookie season, which is pretty impressive overall. And honestly, been an underrated player in the NBA for a while, above in these 80th percentiles for some time now. So very, very underrated player there. If we take a look at some of his shooting stuff, almost all of it assisted, it feels like. Yeah, a lot of the 3-point shots get assisted. He's not creating a bunch for himself, but he's getting himself in the right position overall. 90th percentile right now, 91st percentile last year in terms of like percent assisted shots right there. So I think that that's pretty cool. And this is exactly what you want from 3-and-D, right? He's cutting to the rim when he needs to, and he's shooting corner threes. That's exactly what a guy of his position does. Makes a big difference. So shout out Dorian Finney-Smith. That's a good one. All right, who do we got next? We got Tyrese Maxey here. Defensively, not having the best season. Probably hasn't helped that his like all defensive center in Joel Embiid hasn't been too present this year, because like these are the other things that stats can't talk about, right? Is there's a lot of game planning that goes into things. One of the things that I always talked about with like Josh Giddey, right, is sometimes you guys saw that Josh Giddey got beat going to the rim when he was in OKC. You'll also see, if you go and watch the film, that Josh Giddey is intentionally not letting people go certain directions on the basketball court, and that's because as a team, OKC said, look, we've got Chet at the rim. Chet's pretty dang good at blocking shots, so it's totally fine for you to funnel people to him. That's what the Jazz always used to do with Rudy Gobert. Honestly, the Timberwolves still do that to a certain extent, where it's like, okay, we're totally fine with sending people to these guys because they know what to do with them. And then after that defensive player in Josh Giddey, let's say, gets beat and like the guy gets by him, he's filtered them to Chet, you'll see them kind of X out and fill in the gaps somewhere else. And they're actually playing really good team defense, but stats can't capture that, right? They just can't. They're like, okay, no, lost defender, a little bit different, right? So those are some of the, I'm just trying to give you other nuances so that you can talk as accurately as possible. There's no God stat. I think these are some of the better stats because it takes into account a lot of individual things. But overall, I think it's important to talk about. Amen Thompson here, 98th percentile defensively, 69th percentile overall offensively. So where did Asar come in? Asar worse offensively by a decent amount, but defensively he's 99th percentile. And where was Amen? He was 98th percentile. So that's not a surprise here. We've seen Amen have a lot more like offensive responsibility in Houston, and that's because he came in as kind of the better ball handler of the two, and he can kind of create a little bit more for himself. If we take a look at these numbers overall, offensively, he did go up this year. That's awesome. Defensively, he's even increasing. The win shares is really high for him right now, which is awesome. Again, not the best shooter at the rim. He's pretty dang deadly. Offensive rebounding percentage is pretty crazy for someone that's playing a guard role most of the time. It'd be cool to get the assist percentage up a little bit. I think that'll be kind of the next stage of development for him, but the defensive numbers are pretty nuts. Actually creating a lot of his stuff in comparison to Asar, which I think is kind of interesting. And again, you don't really have a lot of playmakers on the Rockets either, so that's a part of it. And then, yeah, it's all at the rim, and then a decent amount of corner threes. So we're trying to get them up. They're just not really falling right now, as we're only hitting about 27% of them, which is the 8th percentile. Last year, he was the 1st percentile for 3-point shooting, but does everything else so well. Doesn't really matter all that much at the end of the day. doesn't really matter. I feel like I'm saying at the end of the day a lot right now. And you know what? You're just going to have to get over it. LeBron James, no surprise there. Here's Ja Morant coming in at 85 and 85 on both scales. Awesome. Goga Bitadze. There we go. That's a name we want to see right here. That's a fun name to come across. I love this. Let's take a look at Goga. Started to see it a bit last year. Wasn't playing a ton of minutes, only 15 minutes per game, but he was 93rd percentile last year, so we should have probably known, hey, Goga can probably do a little bit more for you, right? Obviously, he's played a few more minutes this year. He's been hurt a little bit here and there, but offensively been pretty effective. Defensively, he's been awesome, right? And again, Orlando Magic, you would find most of those guys pretty good defensively. It helps when you have good defensive teammates as well, right? That's an important distinction. True shooting is awesome because most of his stuff, I'm going to presume, is at the rim. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. If we look at the percent assisted, actually not a ton. And that kind of surprises me. My Orlando Magic fans out there, do you find that to be true? Because again, there's not a lot of people setting up any type of offense. Like I've said before, there's just no playmakers on the team. There's just not. While Franz is getting a high amount of assists, there's just not a great job of setting them up, and that's kind of the scheme's fault. That's kind of the personnel's fault. It's a balance of the two, but kind of surprised here to see that. Looks like the free throw percentage could be a little bit higher, but 93rd percentile in terms of rim attempts. Yeah, that sounds about right. So shout out Goga Bitadze, man. Two Magic players, a little bit underrated here. Let's get them some more support, man. Let's get them some more support. Zach LaVine, we see him up here, really high offensively, a little bit lower on the defensive end this season, which, again, we tend to see that in Zach LaVine's game, but we've also seen moments where the defense is kicked up quite a bit in bigger situations. So one of those people. Cameron Johnson, who I actually think that you would expect a higher defensive number out of Cam Johnson, but 95th overall offensively. Malik Beasley and Isaiah Joe and Santi Aldama. Oh, all three of these I want to talk about. You guys have known I've talked a lot about Malik Beasley this year. 89th percentile offensively, almost 70th percentile defensively. Pretty dang good overall. I've said Malik Beasley, like, I couldn't believe the Bucks let him walk this year. I was like, you have to bring back Malik Beasley, and I know it would have been hard for them to do so, but I don't know. I just think he was important to the team and like their success, and we're seeing that the Pistons are really giving him that huge clip defensively. I mean, he's shooting at 42% right now, which is the 93rd percentile. Not turning the ball much over. I wouldn't read into that too much. Like, not too many people get to dribble on this team outside of Cade. But in terms of attempts, he is the 99th percentile for three-pointers because he's taking 12.1. Jesus, no, that's attempts per 75. That's really high. But he's been chucking these threes, man. He's been chucking them, but he makes them. He really, really makes them. Where has this percentage been over his career? Came in at 40, stuck pretty close to it, right? On not as good basketball teams, you saw it drop a little bit more again, and then get on better basketball teams, you see that percentage go back up again. A high amount of assists right here, or assist percentage. A lot of his shots are getting assisted. That makes a ton of sense. And we're just seeing a large amount of threes or right at the rim. Could probably get rid of some of these. Again, the Pistons are not a perfect team, so, we start to see some of those every once in a while. Very cool. Shout out Malik Beasley. You guys know I've been a big proponent of him. Finally, they're starting to play him more minutes than Tim Hardaway Jr. That was the craziest thing in the world to me. And now they're winning more basketball games. What a surprise. It's just not that hard. Isaiah Joe. I've been saying for forever, Isaiah Joe is the perfect starting shooting guard between J-Dub and Shea and whatever big men they want to play after that. I've always said I think Isaiah Joe is the guy for it, and I think the numbers back it up. 87th percentile offensively, 77th on defense. Overall, that brings him to an 89. Look at this. 97th percentile from the rim, though. You kind of think of him as more of a three-point shooter, but he's kind of attacking and cutting a lot, but in all fairness, the Thunder do drop kind of a drive and kick type system, so it generates a lot of looks for people like that. Isaiah Joe also sneaky cool posters that he has in his career. Doesn't turn the ball over very much. That speaks a lot to just their play style in general. It's very efficient, to say the least. Almost all of his shots are people assists, or getting him assists, but again, the Thunder just generate a lot more assists than the other teams, so that tends to be expected, right? Getting a lot of three-point looks here and at the rim. Isaiah Joe, I think, a very impactful player, underrated defensive player. Everybody on the Thunder team tends to be pretty good defensively, but overall, Isaiah Joe has been he's been awesome. Looking at Santi Aldama, a guy that I've been a big fan of. You guys have heard the story where a couple years ago when he was a rookie, I put him on my taxi service on the Sleeper app for fantasy basketball, and I nicknamed him the Future. And people are like, who the hell is Santi Aldama? I'm like, I promise you, I've watched the film. Dude's going to be a nice basketball player. He's the 4th best player in the Grizzlies. You've got your Jaren Jackson Jr., your Ja Morant, your Desmond Bane, who we've already seen on the list, right? I don't think there was anyone else before that. And now we have Santi Aldama. He has been so good for them, especially on the offensive side of the basketball, and then almost in the 80th percentile defensively as well, which I just find incredibly impressive, everything that he's able to do. I feel like he's able to like create a little bit because he's quicker than the average person, his size. The shooting obviously is pretty dang solid. Is able to elevate athletically, so he's just a versatile basketball player. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here. Rim percentage is looking pretty good. 3-point percentage is nice. Pretty dang good rebounder as well, getting 21% of defensive rebound opportunities, keeping the turnovers really low for a guy that he does handle the ball a decent amount. So we want to give him credit there. And if we take a look at some of the shooting right here, pretty consistent, I would say, percent assisted right here. So he's creating some opportunities for himself as well, which I think is pretty cool. Taking a lot from this corner, that's not a surprise to me. That's just one of the spacing sides, as he's not a primary ball handler. And then he's getting a lot of rim runs, getting a lot of dunks and layups. Not a surprise from what I've seen from Aldama here. Very cool. Very cool. Shout out Santi. All right, who else do we got on this list that we want to go through here? Tyler Hero, Isaiah Hartenstein, Christian Brown. Yeah, I think a lot of us had questions like, hey, KCP not going to be here anymore. What's going to happen here? Because we took a look at Christian Brown last year. Wasn't all that great, right? 31st percentile here, 66th percentile here. We were like, is he really ready to take on the starting shooting guard role? Big jump in this third year. Went from 31st offensively to 85th. Pretty crazy. And then he even jumped up to the top 75 percentile on defense. Awesome to see. The true shooting percentage is really high, and that's because he's taking a lot of three-pointers and he's making an okay amount of them. What is his percentage? 36, so it's above league average. Could be better, but hey, that's something we can work on for next year. Not turning the ball over much, and he has the ball an okay amount during the game. That's, there's a bug. Got it. Got the bug. There we go. We're just going to keep on moving and go right by it. That's some killer reflexes by me right there. Some killer reflexes. Taking a look at the shooting attempts. Let's take a look. Attempts per 75. Honestly, not taking a huge amount of threes overall. I actually would have thought this would be much higher. That's kind of interesting. Again, you expect to see a high percent assisted. There's a lot of S's in there. That's hard for me to pronounce, apparently. Because, again, we know that Denver has a lot of ball movement going on. But taking a lot of shots at the rim. A lot of backdoor cuts and stuff from Jokic hub type stuff. Not a surprise. Very, very cool to see the jump that he's made. I just think that's really impressive. I wouldn't have expected that out of him this year. So, that is pretty cool. Where do we want to go next? We have James Harden. We're in the 87th percentiles now. Jamal Murray, Daniel Gafford, who surprisingly is mostly effective on the offensive end and not as much on the defensive end, which, again, I find very interesting. Like, where was Derek Lively in all of this, right? Derek Lively came in at 94th percentile, so clearly more of the starter at this point is Derek Lively than Daniel Gafford, but one thing that I'd be curious about is I don't think Daniel Gafford is being set up quite as much as we think he is in terms of just like a lob threat. So I kind of just want to investigate that shooting wise right now. So yeah, it's actually only 54%. I do feel like he just kind of gets the ball down low a lot of times and just kind of makes things happen himself. So kind of an underrated part of his game and a sneaky, really good offensive player. I mean, he's never been below the 97th percentile in true shooting, and he's never been below the 98th percentile in effective field goal percentage. That's a valuable player to have on your team right there. So very, very cool out of Daniel Gafford. I'll always be mad that the Bulls traded him. I loved him when they drafted him. I was like, this is our center of the future. Nope. Because the Bulls are dummies. We got Kawhi Leonard, Julius Randle. Sorry, Timberwolves fans. He still is very effective overall. Just doesn't maybe win you as many games. Scotty Barnes here. I will say, I don't think Julius Randle's been like horrible this season, but I do just think that he's holding the team back in certain ways. Scotty Barnes, we'd love to see the offense kick back up. If we were to take a look at Scotty Barnes this year versus like the last year, yeah, we did have a fall off, because I know I was asking in I can't remember if it was yesterday's video or like earlier this week. I said it feels like Scotty Barnes has fallen off quite a bit. Defensively, looking awesome, right? But offensively, taking a bit of a hit. But what did we learn, right? Team's not quite as good right now. There's not as many like players to help him out. Things like that tend to happen, right? There's a lot of nuances to a lot of this that we have to take into account. So something to watch there with Scotty Barnes. We have Nikola Vucevic here, which is pretty much all offense, not as much defense. Chris Dunn. Absolutely. The guy that I think should be Defensive Player of the Year now that Wemby's down, Chris Dunn. 99th percentile defensively, only 33 on offense. He doesn't really do a lot offensively. The three-point percentage has fallen off a decent amount. The last couple years in Utah was looking pretty solid. In the first half of this year, it was looking pretty solid for him, but it is kind of falling off as of late. We take a look at some of his stuff here. He does have to create a lot of his stuff himself, which I think is kind of interesting overall, because you think about like James Harden and how much he has the ball and they're setting other people up. Even like Norm Powell should have a decently high percentage there, but just it's not always true. It is not always true. Where's he going mostly? He's mostly at the rim. That makes sense. Not taking quite as much. I want to take a look at, only 2.2 rim attempts per 75. Yeah, I don't know, but we're seeing some corner three-pointers. I don't know why that feels like a little bit weird for what I'm watching in the game, but I guess like this is reality. That just is what it is. But I feel like I see him take like more of these like wing three-pointers. So I'm just a little bit surprised to see that overall. I think that's interesting. But whatever. We move on. I think Chris Dunn should be Defensive Player of the Year because he's just that good on that side of the ball. Who else do we have? Who else do we want to cover in this? We're starting to get down into those 85th percentiles now, so I won't keep you too much longer. Draymond Green up here. Cameron Payne. Really? Cameron Payne. Okay, see, this is a name I really didn't expect to see up here because I am pretty low on Cameron Payne overall, but 88th percentile offensively this year and above average defensively. Yeah, that'll do it for certain. So what are we getting here? Because we're not the most efficient. We're actually not very efficient at all. We're really bad at the rim, and we're respectable from three. Free throw percentage is really good. Obviously, we're not getting many rebounds. He's almost at a 25% assist percentage. Wow. That's really good, actually. That's really good. And in the 81st percentile, only at the 9th percentile for turnover percentage. Or 9th percentile, he's only at a 9 for turnover percentage. That's pretty interesting, actually. I'm learning stuff right now as well. I find this incredibly interesting. He's getting all of his own shots, and where are they all coming from? Mostly coming at the rim, which is, again, that's why his efficiency isn't very good, because we saw that he's just not very good at it, and he's never been good at it across his career, right? I mean, look at this. 26th percentile was the highest he got at a 55. That's interesting. That's really, really interesting. So, hey, shout out Cameron Payne. Kind of an underrated basketball player, and that's what this whole video is about. All right, how much more do we have? It's probably just one or two more names. We've got Jalen Suggs coming in at an 85. Tari Eason, that's a guy that you expect to see on that list because of the defense, a lot of the rebounding and such. Even if we don't have like crazy efficient stats all the way around, pretty effective basketball player, getting a lot of steals. We got Trae Young in here, Lauri Markkanen, and then we start getting down to the Klay Thompsons and such from down there. But hey, that's it for this video. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a look at some of these stats, kind of where you can look at them. To get some of the more in-depth looks in this video, you do have to buy an account, but I just thought it was a fun thing to kind of look at and explore a little bit with you guys. So let me know if you want more videos like this, if you have other ideas for how I could take a look at this stuff. I'm always down to hear it, but hey, let's move on to our comment of the video. Alrighty, the comment of the video comes from our last week in the NBA video from this week, and it's coming from FPL DJ Hammer, a pretty frequent commenter on the channel. Always appreciate the comments. He said, the way a person talks about someone like Bradley Beal tells me a lot about what kind of sports fan they are. It's a really good barometer to see if you should engage in a debate about sports with them or not. And basically what we're kind of alluding to is the fact that a lot of people kind of shit on Bradley Beal for his performance, but when you look at it, it's really like nothing to... Like, it's nothing to scoff at all. Dude's having a pretty good basketball season overall. Like, the Suns overall... disaster, right? But for the people that are like, it's Bradley Beal's fault for making this much money. Yes, is he a little bit overpaid? Sure, like I agreed, but the dude's having a hell of a basketball season. These are just people that aren't thinking critically and not looking at like, how is he only averaging 18 points a game right now? Because there's Other people scoring like 30 every night. There's just only so many shots. Do you just not get math? I don't understand that. But no, I really appreciate this comment. And also a slightly underrated comment down here. He said, I should try to count a streak of videos where Luka was seen or mentioned since the trade. It might be every single one. We definitely mentioned it in this video, so keep the counter going. But hey, I appreciate you guys. As always, go watch the Jace Richardson video. These are my favorite videos on the channel, and I'll tell you, I'm not getting paid at all for this one because they are claiming this video. They fought me hard for it. They fought me 3 different times on it. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna sit down so I don't get a copyright strike. So hey, go show it some love anyway. Go share it with your friends so I can get some value out of it. But I've loved doing these videos. I'm gonna do another one this week. You'll see one tomorrow. So just be on the lookout for it. I really like doing these videos. But anyway, appreciate you guys as always, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks so much. Bye.